The North Sea was calm that night, a mirror of steel and silence. Hundreds of men worked and laughed aboard the Alexander Kielland platform, believing it to be unsinkable. Then, without warning, a single sound echoed through the dark, a metallic scream that split the air. Within minutes, one of the world's largest offshore rigs began to tilt, twist, and fall into the freezing black water. No explosion, no storm, just one hidden crack, small enough to fit inside a man's palm, yet powerful enough to erase 123 lives. March 27th, 1980, a date written in oil, steel, and sorrow. The Alexander Kielland platform stood proudly in the North Sea, about 200 kilometers from the Norwegian coast, supporting the Edda production platform, part of the booming oil industry that promised fortune and progress. Over 200 men were stationed there, many from Norway, a few from Ireland and Scotland, rough, resilient workers who lived weeks at sea to keep the energy flowing to the world. Life on the platform had its rhythm. Morning drills, machinery humming, coffee breaks filled with jokes and stories of home. The sea was endless, but the work gave purpose. They trusted the structure beneath their boots, a floating city of steel designed to endure anything nature could throw. But that night, nature was not the enemy. As winds picked up and waves began to rise, no one could have guessed that the real threat was already inside, hidden deep within a single joint of metal, invisible to the eye.
Walks into
a tiny crack, born from a flawed weld, had waited patiently for its moment.
"I'll have a pint and one for the road."
The calm before collapse, before tragedy struck, the Alexander Kielland was alive with ordinary moments. Men wrote letters home, played cards, and stared at the horizon through cigarette smoke. The smell of oil mixed with salt water and diesel. Radios played soft static, faint voices from a distant world. Above all, there was a quiet pride among the crew. They were part of something bigger, the frontier of offshore engineering. A floating fortress built to withstand the wildest seas. But the North Sea is never truly calm. Winds shifted, waves grew restless, and metal began to groan with the weight of the storm. The platform swayed, nothing unusual at first. Yet a few workers noticed something odd. A deep, rhythmic vibration echoing through the hull. Like the sound of a heartbeat gone wrong. They reported it, but on a structure that size, strange noises were common. No one imagined that one of the 5 massive legs supporting the platform had already failed. A weld the size of a coin had cracked under pressure, silently, fatally. Hours later, as dusk turned to darkness, rain started to fall. Floodlights flickered across the steel towers. Men zipped up their jackets and prepared for another long night of routine duty, unaware that beneath their feet, the ocean was already claiming its due. The moment of disaster at 6:30 p.m., the storm intensified. Winds howled across the rig, waves smashed against its legs, and visibility fell to near zero. Yet for the crew, this was familiar territory, another rough night in the North Sea. Inside the living quarters, men gathered for dinner, laughing over tin trays and hot tea. Then came a sound that froze every heartbeat, a sharp metallic crack, followed by a deep groan that seemed to rise from the ocean itself. The entire structure shuddered. In the control room, alarms began to wail. Lights flickered. One of the massive support legs had snapped clean off, twisting under its own weight. The platform tilted 5 degrees, then 10, sending furniture, trays, and men sliding across the floor. Within seconds, panic erupted. "Abandon platform," someone shouted through the intercom, but chaos drowned every command. Doors jammed, corridors flooded. The entire rig was now leaning at a deadly angle. Those who managed to reach the lifeboats found them useless. Their release systems jammed as the structure twisted violently. Others leapt into the freezing sea, crashing into waves that felt like knives. Within 20 minutes, the Alexander Kielland capsized completely, a 5-story giant flipping upside down in the darkness. Screams and metal blended into the roar of the storm. Those still trapped inside could feel the world turning above them, the weight of steel pressing down as air pockets collapsed. The human struggle. In the freezing blackness of the North Sea, survival became a matter of seconds. Those who escaped the sinking platform clung to whatever they could. Overturned lifeboats, floating barrels, even pieces of shattered steel. The wind screamed at over 40 knots, and the water temperature was barely above freezing. Hypothermia began within minutes. Some shouted for help. Others prayed silently, their words swallowed by the storm. Rescue helicopters from Norway and the nearby Edda platform fought through the chaos, their searchlights cutting across the waves. Pilots risked everything, hovering dangerously close to the sea, pulling men from the water one by one. But the darkness made it nearly impossible. Dozens drifted away before rescuers could reach them. Among those pulled from the ocean were survivors who would later recall the haunting moments, the screams fading into the wind, the sudden stillness when voices stopped. One man described looking back at the capsized structure and seeing the names of his friends on the lifeboat he couldn't reach. Another said he could still hear banging from inside the hull long after the platform had turned over. When the sun finally rose, it revealed a graveyard at sea, a scene of twisted metal and floating helmets. 123 lives had been lost. Only 89 men survived. The Alexander Kielland, once a symbol of human progress, had become a reminder of how fragile even the strongest design can be when one tiny detail is overlooked. The investigation.
So what are
In the
we
weeks that
looking at
followed,
here?
the North Sea turned into a vast investigation site. Divers descended into the wreckage to photograph,
corrosion?
measure and recover what they could. What they found was shocking. Not the chaos of a storm, not an explosion, but precision in destruction. One of the 5 legs had sheared completely from its bracing, and investigators traced the break to a single welded joint no larger than a hand. That tiny weld,
Today,
connecting a 6-meter steel brace, had cracked, most likely from a fatigue fracture that went unnoticed during inspection. The weld had been poorly executed, its design flawed and its edges never reinforced. Over time, vibration and stress from North Sea storms widened the fracture until on that fateful night it snapped. The discovery sent shockwaves through the offshore industry. Engineers and governments across Europe, including Ireland's emerging oil sector, realized how one overlooked detail could cost hundreds of lives. Safety standards were rewritten overnight. Inspection methods became stricter, and the entire concept of redundancy in offshore structures was redefined. Legacy and lessons, the Alexander Kielland tragedy changed everything. In its aftermath, the offshore world could no longer rely on assumptions of safety. Every platform, every weld, every inspection had to be questioned. Out of the cold waters of the North Sea rose new laws, new designs, and a new respect for the unseen weaknesses that can destroy even the mightiest machines. Ireland too watched closely. As the country expanded its offshore exploration in the years that followed, lessons from Kielland shaped its own safety codes. Engineers who studied the disaster learned that progress without humility is dangerous, that technology, no matter how advanced, is still built by human hands capable of error. Memorials now stand in Norway for the 123 who never returned. Their families remember not just the loss, but the warning their loved ones left behind. Every time a platform rises against the horizon, the ghost of the Alexander Kielland stands beside it, silent, invisible, but never forgotten. Closing narration out in the North Sea, the waves still roll over the place where the Alexander Kielland fell. There is no wreck visible anymore, no lights, no sound, only the endless rhythm of water and wind. But beneath that silence lies a message written in steel and sacrifice. Every engineer, every diver, every worker who steps onto an offshore rig today carries part of that message. That safety is not a checklist, but a promise written in vigilance. That progress must never come at the cost of memory. When storms rise and the platforms sway, they remember the night when a single weld cracked, and the world learned how thin the line is between mastery and disaster.